Hello.
Hello. Isy Veira from Legion DX Sydney here with Catherine from New South Wales Hen Rescue and, all the henny pennies around here who are deciding to just
Have a little peck.
have a little peck.
Yes,
Yeah.
they're all here.
So as you may have seen from our earlier posts, we're going to be doing sort of like a weekly topical discussion. Last week we did the hatching project. Thank you to everyone for your comments on that. We thought it went really well, and we had a lot of people coming up to us just over the weekend saying that they found the info really helpful, so that's good. Today, as some of you would have seen, we're going to talk about a bit of a controversial issue, but something that's in the news quite a lot at the moment, and that's obviously the drought that's affecting Australia and all our farmers.
Yeah, it's a massive issue, and it's one that it's kind of hard to talk about without, if you have any kind of critical view of the Australian Drought Fundraising or any kind of different view, you will pretty much get called un-Australian and uncompassionate straight away. So we want to have a truthful look at the different issues surrounding that and just discuss it. I mean, we're not experts on the drought, but we've done a bit of research, and we know how the media is trying to manipulate people a little bit. So,
I think so.
yeah.
And I think too, another important point which we'll touch on throughout it is we all have a right to say where our tax dollars go.
Yeah.
And for animal rights groups and rescue groups, for our tax dollars to go to drought relief for the reasons we will discuss during this chat, we're not happy with that. And I don't feel that makes me un-Australian at all. We always say having a fair go and things like that. So what about a fair go for the animals?
Yeah. So I think we'll start off by just thinking about how it's been portrayed in the media. And do you want to describe some of the kind of the basic news stories that we're seeing?
We've all seen them. We've all seen the news stories of starving animals on farms. So where there's no grass, there's no feed, and the animals are basically dying if they don't get food straight away. So we've all seen that. And of course, nobody wants to see animals suffering like that.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to see their ribs sticking out and to see animals lying on the ground dying without food or water, and their babies being preened at this same time.
Yeah, so none of us want to see. And one story that comes to mind is one from a few weeks ago where a farmer was ready to shoot. He had quite a few thousand sheep on his property, and they were all slowly starving to death. He was ready to shoot them and bury them in a hole. That was going to be the solution because he couldn't afford to feed them. And the story in the media, I mean, it was all about there was no water on their farm, and he and his daughter had to share the bath water, and that there was no food for the animals, and they were bringing the lambs inside so they weren't dying, and all this kind of thing. And so that was one story, and that comes to mind. Have you got any that?
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot. I've seen stories that have gone viral on social media of, an Aussie bloke going to help his mates on the farm.
I saw that.
He was going to do a few hours hard work, but he ended up collecting bodies from, bodies of bringing in lambs inside to try and get them through, and it was heartbreaking. And he shared it, and it went viral. There's something that we need to really be honest about here. We don't want to see these animals starving, but they're going to be killed anyway.
These are animals that are going to be sent to slaughter. So I think for the media to portray that these farmers really care about their animals, it's not in the same way. I mean, they care about their animals as far as they're going to be able to profit off them. Let's be honest about that, because that's essentially what they are. They're farmers that farm animals to be sent to slaughter for food. So to give money to that, to give money for feed and all, so these animals survive, so that then they can then put them on the back of a truck and send them to slaughter is just mind-boggling. I don't want to support that.
And on one hand, it does fill me with a kind of hope, because people are outraged at seeing animals suffering.
That's right.
Which is wonderful, but the trouble is they're not realising that these animals, if they get them through this bit where they need the feed and the water, what happens next? Is it going to be that they get shipped for live export? Is it going to be that they have the most terrifying day of their lives in a slaughterhouse, being trucked for hours, standing there trembling, knowing that death's all around them and having their throats cut? Is it going to be that they're going to continue to be exploited over the years for breeding or wool, and until they're eventually used up and sent to slaughter? I think if people got into these feelings really that they hate seeing animals suffering, we may have a revolution on our hands.
That's exactly right. And I think that's why they keep playing on that emotion, though. They're not showing the end result. They're showing just that immediate, that animal is starving right now at that immediate time, but they're not looking at why, what the end result, why we want to save them, why we want to help these farmers, you know. And I guess they use that whole, but they need to feed their families, yes, and all that kind of thing as well. There's all that side of it, which, again, you're looking at that profit over lives.
Yeah. And I think, yes, look, nobody wants either families to be starving.
No.
Nobody wants to be doing it tough every single day. But let's be honest that nearly every business that starts fails. And they go through this kind of, small businesses especially, there's a huge percentage of failure, and the government don't swoop in with subsidies to help those starving families or families that are doing it tough.
That's right. I mean, there were some comments on our announcement of this live feed. Yeah, if people lose their job, or if an industry isn't working, something like, especially the farming industry, where drought isn't a new thing. It's not a new thing. We've always had drought here in Australia. And then there's, okay, is it the worst drought we've seen in 120 years? Well, there is global warming, so there's other issues there as well. But is throwing money at a dying industry, at an unsustainable industry, at an unethical industry, the right thing to do? That's another thing I think that we need to look at. So,
and then as far as those donations, we also see times where one farmer, like the person who was going to shoot all his sheep, get a huge amount of donations, but surrounding farmers don't get that help. And
that's right,
whether they're crop farmers or an animal sanctuary or any other kind of farmer. So it's not even really fair how the media has portrayed this issue.
That's right.
And I think that so on the one hand, I'm hopeful. People do care about animals, it seems. They hate seeing the suffering. But on the other hand, the media is part of this society that consumes animals, that sees them as products. So of course they're going to support this idea that that farmers are the down on the
backbone of Australian,
the Aussie battlers.
Yeah.
And it's true, they're hard workers, and we're talking about the majority here. So if there's exceptions and so on, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about the majority of farmers who work in, as far as livestock, a violent and exploitative industry.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So we're going to look at a little bit further into the issues now, and that's some of the comments that we received, and we're going to try and address some things. And let's have a look. So we've had some comments here. Did you want to read the highlighted bits of this one?
So this comment by one of our supporters, Melanie: if you bought an animal and you all of a sudden can't afford to feed that animal, and you can't afford to feed them, so you just don't feed them, this is animal cruelty. You'll be fined, and those animals taken away. And that is animal cruelty, and that you should be punished. So it's interesting that in any other circumstance where you can't feed your animals and you continuously breed them, knowing that you're not going to be able to feed them. So, for example, with this farmer with the sheep and the lambs, why did he breed his sheep?
Yeah.
If he knew that he's been in drought for a while, for his land to get to the state it's in.
We actually have a comment. Let me have a look. Okay, so this is from a farmer on our page called Jenny. She says, the fact is, as a farmer, I know that when the grass is going, the money's not there to buy fodder. Then I have to act before my animals get into this appalling state. farmers have as much responsibility as an urban dog owner to care for the animals. If you cannot feed them, then you do not keep them until they get to this state. This is an animal cruelty issue, and I cannot understand why the RSPCA is not out there taking action. You simply cannot run a livestock business in this manner. It's certainly not going to be profitable. Animals like these should be put out of their misery. And I mean, it's true that she's showing there's a responsibility. Now, we would look at it in the way that no death of an animal, whether at the end of whether when they're profitable or before they're profitable, is the right thing to do. But she makes a good point about continuously breeding when you can't feed the animals.
When you can't feed them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with this farmer, he'd bred his sheep knowing that he wasn't going to be able to feed them. The interesting thing is too, we actually contacted him. We had some homes for some of the mothers and the babies, but within 24 hours, he got some of the drought assistance and he suddenly was able to feed his livestock for, I don't know for how long, and we never heard anything back from him.
But so, I wonder if he would have replied anyway. I mean,
well, we're not sure. We had to try anyway,
yes.
Because if he was only, again, he was going to just shoot them and bury them in a hole. I mean, now he's feeding them and they're going to be sent to slaughter. So
yeah, I feel like we should mention here the winter lamb issue in Australia anyway, even when it's not drought. 15 million lambs every year in Australia die from exposure, being orphaned, and that's part of the sheep industry.
That's right.
And that's seen as quite normal, if not somewhat hidden, in the Australian lamb industry. So death and violence is part of the industry.
It's part of the animal agriculture industry, or the animal abuse industry, as
yes. So
I started calling them.
Yeah. So Karen says, I think you'll find farmers do not see themselves as charities. Many have been suffering in silence for years. The drought hasn't suddenly just appeared. Farmers are killing themselves. Families are being destroyed. So firstly, I think she makes a good point about the fact that this drought has been going for, not this drought, but the drought climate of Australia is an ongoing issue. Australia is a dry land in its heart. And why are we trying to farm it in this way, which just doesn't seem to match the land?
No.
Putting all these animals in a desert and expecting for there never to be an issue with water.
Yeah, and clearing even more land to farm animals that aren't sustainable for our environment here as well. So again, to be throwing money at an industry like that just doesn't make sense. Or if you are going to have some kind of assistance program, why aren't you looking at alternative farming methods then? Or what about the crop farmers?
Yeah.
We noticed in one article that we looked at that the reason that crop farmers don't get as much drought assistance, or if any, and it's very minute compared to what livestock farmers get, is because the how did they word it? That it isn't as emotive to see dry land of crops or dying crops as what it is to see dying animals.
I think the person said it's not as emotive to see a chickpea that's not sprouting as a starving animal, and it's completely right. But it doesn't mean that you'll notice that all these stories, I think I've seen one story on fruit trees, otherwise they're nearly all on livestock and the subsidies. That $1 billion from New South Wales government of taxpayers' money, that is going in majority to livestock farmers, these individual animals that are going to be exploited and slaughtered. So now she also touched on the issue of suicide in the farming community, and that's an issue over many different veterinary medicine, it's an issue
all
that
industries
goes over society
definitely.
as a whole.
Definitely.
And I think that's another issue that's broader than this video.
Well, and of course, yeah, and again, we're not saying that none of that matters or anything like that. When a person takes their life, that is an awful thing, but you're right, that's a bigger issue.
Yeah, I also feel that the livestock industries also have inbuilt into them a kind of disrespect for life and violence that is every day, whether it's cutting tails, castration without anaesthetic, slitting throats, shooting animals in the head that might not be profitable. So I it's sad to think that that might also rub off on human families.
That's
and
right.
lives. I'm not saying that that's
right.
the cause, but that definitely there's a link, for example, between slaughterhouse workers and domestic violence at home.
Oh, there's a lot of research looking into that at the moment. But that can even be another discussion that we
could be
have
another one, yes.
at another time. Yeah.
So we've got another comment here saying this person has been afraid of sounding un-Australian, which is exactly
what we were talking about before.
And she says she's not against helping anyone who's doing it tough, but farmers need to stop trying to farm marginal land, and consumers have to support farmers who have long-term plans such as partial revegetation and sustainable farming methods, regardless of crop or livestock. Being vegan doesn't mean you can't harm the environment by eating unsustainably, which is true. There are issues with all food and consumption. I think being vegan uses far less resources.
Well, far less water, far less land.
Yes.
And then there's the whole ethical side to it as well. But even if you look at things like Cowspiracy, they talk about how unsustainable the animal agriculture industry is.
Yeah.
And our whole point here is about the drought assistance program. So again, throwing money at something that's not working.
Yeah.
She makes a good point, though. Why aren't we looking at, why don't we have long-term plans, for farming this kind of land? There was an article, which I will put into the comments, about a crop farmer whose father understood that the Australian land was going to come into drought quite often. And so they drought-proofed their land. They made sure they had proper irrigation, that they were using the proper water from all the dams, that any water that they collected on their farm would be used in the most sustainable way on their farm, which is the way we should be thinking, I think, rather than throwing money at something that's just not really getting anywhere. We should be looking at these sort of alternative methods.
I also think that there's a point's been made that not all of Australian land is suitable for crop farming, for example. Why do we have to use every single piece of land? Can desert be desert? Can we allow it to be revegetated where it can be? Can we allow wildlife to exist? The fact is that a huge amount of grain and food currently goes to feeding livestock. If we didn't have that and we use plants to feed people, we would be able to use the land that we can farm so much more wisely, and the water that we do have so much more wisely as well. So yeah, it's another issue again as far as the environmental impact of veganism versus meat eating.
But
diet.
even the United Nations has done a lot of research on that and has come out saying that the more sustainable way to eat and for the entire world is a plant-based diet, is a vegan diet.
Yes. So let's have a look at. So we have had a comment here from somebody who says not all sheep or cattle farms are for slaughter. Some grow wool and others grow breeder stock. The fact is they're starving, and if it weren't for these charities, these people who spend any money, they wouldn't be fed. Well, I mean, maybe they won't get slaughtered straight away for wool, but they will get slaughtered.
And they're still a part of an industry. They're still if they're breeder stock even, they're still a part of the industry that breeds the stock that gets sent to slaughter.
Yeah.
They're still a part of the abuse industry, even if they're any use of animals, whether it's for food or clothing or entertainment. So they're all a part of that one industry. They might not be getting sent to slaughter straight away, but when that animal's not of any use anymore, when you look at animals as a commodity or as something to make money from, what happens when you're not making money from them anymore?
Yeah. And she did mention she knows some farmers who have kept some for their lives. I have to say that we're talking about the majority again. These things may happen as the exception. They may have Daisy the cow who they keep, but to think of the suffering of Daisy's friends and family who have been sent to slaughter, it doesn't make it okay.
That's right.
So but thank you for your comment anyway. It's good to look at these different kind of ideas. So this is another comment from Jocelyn. She says there needs to be a fundraising scheme to buy out farms in marginal areas and rehabilitate the land to native vegetation. As an Australian sheep, I would probably prefer to die of starvation at home with my flock of friends than be saved through fundraising and put on a death ship to the Middle East.
Yeah.
Some areas in Australia should not be farmed. It's environmental vandalism to ignore climate change and to continue to farm land in a way that promotes topsoil being blown away. I feel for the farmers, but I have more concern for the long-term future of Australia.
Thank you, Jocelyn. That is a great comment.
And it kind of goes back to this idea of, you know what, it's not all about profit right now. It's about this earth, the animals that we're living with. This isn't sustainable. The society that we're living it has too much violence at the moment, too much exploitation. And maybe we could use this as an opportunity to see that things aren't working and to see that Australians truly care about animals.
Yeah, definitely.
And that they can use that feeling that they found within themselves to actually bring about change by stop paying for them to be exploited.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's just that shift in mindset. I really like this phrase that she uses as well, environmental vandalism.
Yeah.
To ignore climate change, because I think it's something that we can't keep ignoring. We don't have the time to just keep throwing money at something that's not working.
Yeah.
So it's definitely time for that mind shift, I think.
Yeah, and I've been having a look at some ABC articles as well, and this one here, it's saying Australian droughts on the rise due to climate change. The frequency and intensity of heat events, fire weather and drought will be increasing. And I think that means that, it has to be factored in. And not only that, but we have to take huge action right now to stop climate change in its tracks. We need to go to a vegan diet, which causes so much less destruction of climate and environment. And also, it's just as immediate as the animal suffering, we can't just keep acting like we've got forever. This is such an urgent situation.
That's exactly right. And again, like with the drought assistance program, maybe a part of that program should be looking into climate change as well, rather than just trying to fix something that's broken.
Yeah.
I can't reiterate that enough. I'm going to keep sort of repeating that because I think that's something that people really need to push for.
Yeah, so I tried to do some research into crop farmers as well, because we really haven't, as I mentioned, we haven't seen much of them in the media. And I want to be honest that we're all relying on farmers to eat.
Of course we are.
Vegans,
yeah.
we make a distinction between harmers and farmers. Harmers that exploit animals and farmers that create beautiful crops for us to eat and thrive from. So I didn't find that much, but because there hasn't been that much coverage of crop farming. But the one I did find says that, from ABC, says New South Wales crop farmers are feeling overlooked by the public and government compared to livestock producers as they all battle drought conditions. One of the farmers says, there's a lot of emotion with stock. It's easy for the primetime media to portray, whereas I suppose watching crops fail doesn't rate quite as highly. And it's true. I mean, it's not going to be... nobody, as we've already said, everybody hates seeing animals starve. We do. Everybody does. So they're not getting the same... They're getting a very tiny amount of those subsidies, if anything. And I think that this is someone, Mr. Westcott, actually switched to crop farming away from animal farming. And he says he expects the current drought to push more farmers away from sheep and cattle. Well,
I'm kind of happy about that.
I hope so. And one of our comments that I didn't read fully earlier did say that, naturally, if it wasn't for subsidies, the price of meat would increase by a huge amount. And I think whilst we don't want it to exist, we don't want a single animal to suffer this incredible torture and violence. If the price increased, that's a start. It shouldn't be something that people are stuffing down their face at every meal. This is a product of incredible violence.
Yeah. Well, and one of the myths of veganism is that it's an expensive way to eat as well.
Yeah, which it can be if you eat, everything you buy from a specialist shop. Maybe
rice, beans, potatoes, your general staples.
Even, dark chocolate doesn't have to be expensive.
No.
So you can
go to Aldi.
But if you do choose to live on Ben & Jerry's dairy-free ice cream only, then it's a bit more expensive, but it's good for a treat. We've got some... Someone says, it's ironic seeing people outraged about the animals starving, yet they're happy for them to be killed so they can eat them. Which is something that we'd covered earlier on.
Yeah.
So there was some more, talking about crops, there was some more comments. Someone said, much of inland Australia is unsuitable for traditional European farming practices. And this same person said we need to set aside large areas of land that's solely dedicated to tree farming and wildlife preservation. Trees are a wonderful resource. And it's true. You know, the way that the country deals with these extreme weather conditions usually is the fact that it has all of this nature upon it, which helps, you know, trees and wildlife and plants that suit the nature, and we've just stripped it all away to make farms.
I was up in Queensland a few months ago, which has the biggest population of beef cattle in all of Australia, and Queensland is just so dry and arid, and there's nothing there at all. There's just nothing there. And I think if we keep farming animals on that kind of land, then it's just going to keep getting worse. The land doesn't have time to regenerate.
Yeah.
And we already have land that's unsuitable for cloven-hooved animals, and all they do is pack the dirt tighter, and then we clear the trees, they pack the dirt tighter. It just keeps this chain ball effect going and going. Whereas if you start...
Look at Frida. Frida's not impressed by our notes.
No, she doesn't like... Yeah, this is what she
thinks. She's like, no, this is what I think about the fundraising. I'm going to give it a good old peck.
What do you think? So
now we're going to come to another comment that's only recently I've started seeing a couple of articles about wildlife and how the wildlife is affected by the drought. And it's really disturbing. And people are not even in most cases assisting the wildlife, but are making things even harder.
Yeah.
With the exception of wildlife carers. I've got a couple of articles. One says, reports have recently surfaced of four-wheel drive vehicles leaving roads and mowing down kangaroos in residential Kelaher. That's from an ABC report. And the title of that headline is Drought Pits Native and Domestic Animals Against Each Other Amid Competition for Food.
So obviously the drought doesn't only affect livestock, which, going back to what we were saying about the media portrayal of it all, you don't see the media talking about that
very little
as much. But obviously if Australia is in drought and the land is in drought, then all our wildlife is affected as well.
Yes, and the thing is, even the ways that they would usually cope with drought, it's all being messed up by the farmers.
That's right.
They can't access all the food that they once had, and if they do try to graze on crops that are there now in their homes, they're likely to get shot. Again, I'm talking about the majority. There may be exceptions, farmers that are not like this towards kangaroos, but that seems to be the majority opinion. And also from this article, in response to alleged plague populations, kangaroo culling legislation has been relaxed. And considering how easy it was for people to already shoot kangaroos, it's devastating to think that now there's even less red tape, if any, that they have to go through to kill these animals.
A native animal, mind you, that you're killing for livestock that shouldn't be here in the first place.
It baffles me.
Just had to point that part out.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do another video about introduced species and our feelings on them, but that's not even an issue here.
No.
Kangaroos are native and they're still treating them like absolute trash.
Yeah.
And as if they're this massive inconvenience, when really they are... I mean, Kim says you can't make as much money from wildlife. That's a good point. There's no profit in wildlife. So, well, there could be if people embraced it.
And why are we looking at animals in terms of what profit we can make from them? Like, I think
she's right. That's what she's pointing out.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, and they also point out that without the red tape, unskilled hunters will usually pick off the largest kangaroos because they're an easy target or thought to have the most meat. But these kangaroos are the alpha males, mob bosses, who control breeding by only allowing their own gene pool to triumph.
So again, we're messing with the natural order of things in a way by interfering there.
Kangaroos have a way of... Well, they only raise one joey per year to adulthood. And there's a high mortality rate anyway. And they control their own population, not to mention that they have a drop of population of about 60% in drought conditions, and that's without interference from humans. So they are up against so much without being shot at. And I found some really upsetting quotes, which in another article, which said, so farmers say large kangaroo numbers are causing environmental damage to their properties, and efforts to preserve pastures as the season started to fail were derailed by excessive numbers of kangaroos. And one of the farmers said, it's like farmers are giving free adjustment to the kangaroos, and that's hurting our own stock, and it's making our farming businesses less sustainable. Free adjustment when you've stolen their land in the first place. It's ridiculous.
You're farming on their original home.
Yeah, and forcing them out to the road. I mean, this is what one of the articles was talking about, wildlife carers being under immense pressure and not being able to keep up because the kangaroos are being forced towards towns to try and find water. They haven't got their natural habitat now, really.
Yeah.
And they are in competition with livestock, which should never be the case. And when they get there, they're getting hit by cars, whether on purpose, as that article mentioned previously, or by accident. And the wildlife carer said that some are left for hours alive still by the side of the road before someone comes to put them out of their misery. And it's quite sickening that money isn't being ploughed in from our government to protect beautiful kangaroos and other wildlife. Why is that not a priority? Surely it just comes down to business, doesn't it?
I think so. But again, with what we started with, it's great that people are showing that they care about animals, starving animals. So maybe consider some of our native wildlife that are being affected by this drought as well, and asking the government what they're doing. What's their drought assistance program for the animals, for the native wildlife that's out there, as opposed to just culling them.
And if they must think about money as their only thing they ever think about, then think about the tourism to Australia. People love kangaroos from overseas. Without them, it's really less enchanting. It really is. They're just the most beautiful animals, and the way that we treat them is, well, it's just like we treat our farmed animals and our introduced species. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
So, and I do ask anyone that hasn't watched if you can watch Kangaroo, the documentary. I think it's kangaroothemovie.com. And you can...
We can post it in the comments after. We'll post it.
And that gives a whole overview of the kangaroo meat industry as a whole, and the lies that have been spun about it being an environmentally sustainable meat, when really they should be just left alone. Look, I'm being preened. Where are you? There she is. Hello! We've got a guest. So I'd like to touch on, as we come towards the end, I'd like to touch on sanctuaries.
Yeah,
sanctuaries.
The interesting thing that I read a few weeks ago, when this whole thing happened with that particular sheep farmer, I spoke to a few sanctuaries that I know. And this is the beauty of people who run sanctuaries. When they hear of animals in need, they are one of the first ones to step up and go out there and help, a lot like Hen Rescue does. Now, a lot of these sanctuaries are also in areas that are in drought-affected areas, but they're not part of the drought assistance program. So because they don't have, again, it's the terminology that always gets me. They don't have products of primary industry. They're not farming products of primary industry, so they're not a part of the drought assistance. But they still have animals to feed. And
not only that, but animals that will be safe for life.
That's exactly right. These are animals that have been saved from a lot of these animal abuse industries. And
I think that's what the public are wanting. They see we know it's not just the public appreciating their food, because otherwise it would transfer over to crop farmers. It's about people feeling this emotive feeling towards wanting to save animals, and feeling this, oh my gosh, that farmer who loves his sheep now has to shoot them. How terrible. So we know people care. So imagine if you could donate money or buy a bale for a sanctuary where not only are they going to care for the animals now, but they're going to provide for their whole future, and they're never going to threaten to kill the animals.
That's exactly
no
right.
matter what.
No matter what happens, they'll never do that. Some of them do adoption programs and things like that, but most of the time they offer these animals a home for life. And rather than rather than your tax dollars going to a dying industry or an industry, like Catherine said, is just going to send these animals to slaughter, why wouldn't you want to buy a bale or give some assistance to a sanctuary who's saving animals?
I'm being preened. This was Kim. She got all up in our grill in the last one as well. And yeah, she's very curious.
So I'll post a whole bunch of sanctuaries in the comments, but if you go to Brisbane Animal Save, what they've been doing is posting different sanctuaries every day or every week that are in drought affected areas and that are looking for some help to stay open and to keep feeding their animals.
And the price of feed is going to go up, because even though the crop farmers aren't getting assistance, you know, that means that the prices are going to go up. So sanctuaries, and it will affect us here in us city slickers as well, who have hen rescue and such. Eventually the price of feed will go up, so by donating you can really help. And yes, there's a lot of sanctuaries that need help right now.
Yeah, I mean, to name it, there's Lucky Stars Sanctuary, there's Peanuts Funny Farm, there's
Where Pigs Fly,
Death Row Unchained, Where Pigs Fly has started as well, a campaign.
I've forgotten the name of the one down in Canberra, Place of Peace.
Oh, okay.
They had some big issues with the drought, and they have
there's a poultry place as well.
Poultry place. There's so many. I'm sorry if we've forgotten to say. There's so many.
But we will post. Yeah, we will post some. And like I said, go to the Brisbane Animal Save page as well, because they've posted a lot in there, because they've been running that kind of story as well. Obviously, because Brisbane is dealing with so much. Queensland is dealing with so much drought as well.
So that's something positive that you can do if you want to help. I think that if you have that feeling inside you that you hate seeing these animals suffer, that you cannot stand to see an animal starving to death, then you are already vegan. You just need to change your habits to match your morals. Honestly, you feel the same way as we do. You don't want animals to suffer, and deep down, you don't want them to be exploited for you. If you were in a slaughterhouse and you were standing there as the baby calves from the dairy industry were trembling and waiting to be slaughtered and trying to suckle your hands, as we have been, you would want to rescue those animals. And I think that's what the Australian public want to do. They want to rescue these animals deep down. They might not say it because it might seem un-Australian.
Yeah.
They want to make out they're helping the farmers, but as we've said, that would be the crop farmers too if that was the case.
Well, you can look at it as well. Even if you do want to help the farmers, then help them look at new means of farming.
Yeah.
Then we're
just
not
like that. Was it? I can't remember the man's name now, but the person that did go over to crop farming. Now he didn't do it for ethical reasons, but the fact is that let's create the demand for crops, for plant food, and let's support our true farmers rather than these harmers.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And let's remember the everyday violence that takes place on farms, the death, the destruction on a daily basis, and the terror that animals suffer through.
And if you haven't seen any of these kind of things, and look, it can be quite graphic to watch, but I think it's necessary for people to understand what it is that they're paying for. There are videos on the Legion DX Sydney page as well, or you can go to sites like aussiefarms.org, which shows standard farming practices and standard slaughter practices, a lot of them that are approved by the RSPCA, and like Catherine said, happening every single day. So if you really are someone that cares about animals, then I think you need to understand what it is that you're paying for.
And it's, as one of our favourite activists says, you've been lied to. You know, that's
been lied to your whole life.
There's these sheds that are full of suffering animals, and I think that we've all been there. We've all been in a place that where we didn't know what was happening. So you can only do your best until you know better, and then you can do better.
Yeah.
So watch Dominion. It's hard watch, but it's essential, especially if you're paying into that industry. And then when you feel that horrible feeling of sadness for the animals and the farmers, channel that into activism to help animals all round. And maybe even if there's a way to reach out to that farmer, do so and offer your support as a person, but suggest other means of making an income. And perhaps there's a way to support them without supporting what they do. But personally, I wouldn't be going into Woolworths on the day that they're giving all of their last week when they gave all of their profits to farmers and things like that. Like, they can't force us. They can take our tax dollars, but they can't force us to give extra money into the meat and animal exploitation industries.
Yeah, I won't ever support someone who continues to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And exploiting animals for food, entertainment, clothing is the wrong thing to do, and there's no right way to do the wrong thing. And I don't appreciate being told that I'm un-Australian for saying that, because I do believe in the very Australian saying of giving everyone a fair go, and that includes the animals as well.
Yeah,
so,
it does. Yeah. So just remember that the animals are... Remember that feeling of wanting to help the animals? Cling on to that. And thank you for tuning in. And we'll see you next week on Friday or Saturday, where we'll have another chat about another hot topic.
Another hot topic. All right, thanks guys for tuning in.
See ya. Bye.